2 weeks ago, Canon released firmware version 1.0.4.1 for the Canon R5C, but it had a bug in it. The bug essentially enabled pixel shift, which this camera doesn't have since it doesn't have IBIS. And the concern I had, along with others, was that it could potentially brick the camera since there was no way to actually turn it off. A little over a week later, they pulled the firmware off the site since multiple users were reporting the issue, and this past Friday they released an updated version of the firmware that solved this problem, and that is firmware version 1.0.5.1. Here's the old video to check it out, but this new version solves it, so there's not really a lot to be worried about. I updated the camera that I'm shooting on right now, and for the past couple of days it's been great. Haven't had any bugs, any issues, so now we're going to update this one together. I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, start off by taking your freshly formatted SD card. It's not going to work with the CF Express card, and place it in your laptop. From here, it's pretty direct. You're going to head over to Canon's support website, select the Canon R5C, select your operating system. I'm on a Windows laptop, so that's what I'm going with. Download the firmware, unzip. Those are all instructions there, but basically all it is that you're going to drag this update over to the root folder, which means you're not going to put it in any of the folders. And then you're going to take it out of your SD card, and that's when the update begins. Now, here's a part you definitely don't want to mess up. Make sure your battery is fully charged or leave it plugged in. Pop the SD card back in the camera. Also, fun fact, that is my 10-year-old 70D. Let me know how the image quality compares to the R5C. And now we're going to turn our camera on. Hit the Q menu, go to Setup, and go to the 9th screen. That's the very last one. Select Firmware, Camera, and it's going to ask you if you want to update the firmware to version 1.0.5.1. This one has the faulty one. And hit OK. Now, this update takes about 10 minutes, approximately. It took about 10 minutes for that one to update. Number one update is still the reduced time between switching from photo mode to video mode. This is something that anyone who bought into this camera very recently is really lucky to have because we had to deal with an almost 10-second delay prior. So while we're doing this, let's go over a couple of the comments that I got on the last video because some of them are truly ridiculous. So a couple of comments, I don't have an R3, but someone said that their R3 bricked, and that there were several other R3 owners who had theirs bricked. I guess they received a similar update. Thank you for posting this video. Definitely shit that Canon is not openly communicating this to their customers. This is what the bad firmware update. I might make it standard to not update the most recent firmware right away as it would suck for something to go wrong. This is actually typically what you're supposed to do, is not update immediately. I was just really excited with some of the newer features, so I pulled the trigger on one of my other cameras. So this is the right mindset to approach this, especially since the C line is their professional line. And regardless of what anyone says, the number one reason you invest in professional equipment, not for codecs, not for features, obviously like those are going to be contributing factors, but the number one reason you buy professional equipment is that it is reliable.
I need reliability.
It is reliable and you don't have issue shoot day, and the fact that they wouldn't address that it might have been okay just shooting in a different mode is a problem. Now, this isn't to say that it doesn't happen with other manufacturers. It absolutely does. It happens to Fujifilm quite often, I want to say, but the thing is, they pull firmware immediately and they openly communicate with customers so we're not left wondering what's going on. I don't know why Canon's stance is typically to just not comment, but it's not helpful as a person who invested a lot of money into this system and uses it on a daily basis.
You're not supposed to hate your customers, are you?
I don't consider this a problem for me as I don't ever use custom settings. That's actually fine, and I stuck to manual, but my thing is, like, would there be a certain button combination I could accidentally press to enable it? That was really the answer that I needed, and I just didn't get that. It seemed okay. I kept one of my Fuji cameras with me just in case something flubbed up, but for the most part, it was contained to the custom settings, although what was odd, and fuels my theory that this is a hardware difference, is that this camera that I'm recording on now had the issue after the update, and then this one didn't. I bought these two cameras a few months apart, and I'm thinking there was a hardware change, probably due to the supply chain shortage that we had last year, and maybe that's what caused the difference. This one updated even faster than that one. I wonder if the battery pack is just speeding things up. Something to note is that this will reset all your settings, so you do have to put them all back in manually, or you just sync it with the app later. Happy birthday, America. Let's see. Set. So all your custom settings are now gone. You have to go back in and do them over, which is perfectly fine as standard for pretty much any major firmware update these days on any manufacturer. Also note that they say do not save your settings on the old firmware and then update and try to put them here. It might cause a problem. I haven't tried it personally, but I'm going to go ahead and take their recommendation on that. So here are two comments I got under my skin a little bit. You are making a big deal out of this. Even Apple issued flawed firmware sometimes, yeah, and we give them shit for it. Just keep using manual and issue solved. Again, we need confirmation from them to make sure that this isn't going to brick on the job. There will be future firmwares for sure. They turned it around in about 2 weeks, which is, decent enough time. Nice, almost hit job on Canon. Brand loyalty is such a weird thing in a space where you are paying the company. I don't fully understand it. And while you're talking to a guy, look at this mess back here.
Why do you have all these toys?
Obviously, we all have our preferences. Obviously, I invested in this system because it's a good system. That doesn't allow companies to skate when they mess up, and especially not when they don't communicate with their customer base.
I just think that so many of the major problems and conflicts in the world are caused by a lack of communication, you know?
That's a really important part of maintaining that brand loyalty, especially when there's a large investment on the customer side of things. Okay, future firmware update I would like to see would be the addition of C-Log 2, and although they said that it doesn't have the dynamic range, the sensor doesn't have the dynamic range for C-Log 2, if you shoot in Cinema Raw Light, and then you add a denoiser, it essentially grays like C-Log 2. It's just that it's not in a compressed codec, which is super weird. And that is pretty much the only thing I can think of. Also, I'm not entirely certain if this is possible to do through a firmware update, but I would much rather use a dummy battery like we normally do to get access to the 8K60, rather than use the PD power thing. It's weird, although that might be a hardware issue at this point since this is already released the way it is. But I rigged this one up here with a dummy battery, a Condor Blue, without any issues, and I just think it's a little weird that you don't have full access to all the codecs and stuff the same way you would if you plugged in through the PD port. That's essentially it for this video, just an update for those who are looking, in case anyone hasn't heard that the firmware is up, it's out, it's tested, it's good to go. Link to the firmware update will be in the description below, and if there's anything else you'd like me to cover before I decide making some more random videos, let me know.